In the packed federal courtroom in downtown Manhattan, the gavel slammed down like a verdict already sealed in blood. Sophie Harrington stood at the plaintiff's table, her voice slicing through the air as she laid out the opening argument against Voss Tech. But every word tasted like ash because the woman she had loved in secret for 2 years sat directly across from her. Leslie Voss met her gaze without flinching, yet Sophie saw the flicker of pain behind those sharp green eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with nothing but tenderness the night before. The case was supposed to be just business, a billion-dollar patent war between their families' empires. But in that moment the line between love and destruction blurred beyond repair. The trial had consumed New York for weeks, headlines screaming about Harrington Innovations versus Voss Tech in the biggest AI software infringement suit the city had seen in decades. Sophie, 32 and already a named partner at her family's elite firm, had built her entire career on winning impossible cases. Her father expected nothing less. Leslie, 31 and equally ruthless as lead counsel for the defense, carried the Voss legacy on her shoulders like armor forged in fire. No one in the courtroom knew that the two women had been meeting in hidden corners of the city for 2 years, stealing hours in Leslie's Upper West Side apartment, where the world outside ceased to exist. Their love had begun at a legal ethics conference in Chicago, two ambitious women bonding over late-night debates that turned into something neither could walk away from. They had promised each other it would never interfere with work. Promises like that were easy to make before the gavel fell. After the morning session ended in recess, Sophie slipped into the empty conference room on the 3rd floor, heart pounding. Leslie was already there, door locked behind her. "We can't keep pretending this is sustainable," Leslie whispered, her hands trembling as she pulled Sophie close for one desperate second. "Every time you cross-examine my witnesses, I feel like you're carving pieces out of us." Sophie pressed her forehead to Leslie's, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. "It's the only way we survive, Les. My father is watching every move. Yours too. If anyone finds out." She didn't finish. They both knew the consequences. Exposure would not only tank their careers, but ignite a scandal that could topple both family empires in the conservative circles where old money still dictated terms. That evening, back in the safety of Leslie's apartment overlooking the Hudson, they tried to forget the day. Sophie poured 2 glasses of Cabernet while Leslie dimmed the lights. "Tell me again why we thought we could do this," Leslie said softly, tracing a finger along Sophie's jaw. Sophie smiled despite the knot in her stomach. "Because loving you is the only thing that feels real anymore." They talked for hours about everything except the case, but the shadow of the courtroom lingered. Sophie had noticed her father acting strangely lately, cryptic phone calls and locked study doors. When she asked, he only said, "Win clean, Sophie. There's more writing on this than you know." The words echoed in her mind as she left Leslie's place at midnight, slipping out the service entrance like always. The second day of trial brought new fire. Sophie presented internal Voss emails that suggested deliberate code theft, her delivery flawless. Leslie countered with expert testimony that dismantled the timeline, her cross-examination so precise it drew murmurs from the gallery. During a brief break, they passed each other in the marble hallway. Leslie's hand brushed Sophie's for half a second, a silent signal they had used since the beginning. Later that night, Sophie drove to the family estate in the Hamptons for a strategy dinner. Her father, Victor Harrington, waited in the oak-paneled study with a glass of scotch. "You're doing well, but remember the Voss family has skeletons. Use them if you must." Sophie nodded, ambition surging. Yet the memory of Leslie's touch made her question everything. By the time she returned to the city, doubt had taken root. She texted Leslie, "We need to talk about our families. Something feels off." The reply came instantly. "My place. Now." When Sophie arrived, Leslie was pacing. "My mother mentioned some old agreement tonight. She said if this trial goes public in the wrong way, both companies lose." They sat on the couch, hands intertwined, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars they could never reach. Sophie felt the first real crack in their carefully built world. Love had always been their secret strength. Now it threatened to become their greatest weakness. As the week wore on, Sophie pushed harder in court, winning small rulings that chipped away at Voss Tech's defense. Each victory brought her closer to the promotion her father dangled like bait, but farther from the woman she couldn't imagine living without. Leslie fought back with equal skill, her eyes hardening during sessions yet softening the moment they were alone. The pattern repeated. Courtroom enemies by day, lovers by night. But the strain was showing. Sophie began to wonder how long before one of them broke. By Friday, the media had dubbed it the Family Feud trial. Paparazzi waited outside the courthouse, forcing Sophie and Leslie to leave through separate exits. In the quiet of Leslie's bedroom that weekend, they held each other tighter than usual. "Promise me we'll find a way," Leslie murmured against Sophie's shoulder. Sophie promised, but deep down she knew choices were coming. Choices that would demand sacrifices neither had prepared for. The secret pact between their families was about to surface, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The weekend offered no escape. Sophie spent Saturday reviewing documents at her downtown loft, but her mind kept drifting to the conversation with Leslie. Sunday morning she drove back to the Hamptons unannounced, determined to press her father for answers. Victor Harrington was in the garden, pruning roses with surgical precision. "The Voss family and I go way back," he said finally, wiping his hands on a towel. "College roommates. We made a side deal years ago to protect both empires from bigger sharks. This lawsuit is theater, Sophie. Win it clean and the merger happens quietly. Lose control of the narrative and we both burn." He refused to elaborate, but the implication hung heavy. Sophie left with more questions than answers, texting Leslie the fragments on her way back to the city. Leslie met her at a discreet cafe in Brooklyn that afternoon, far from prying eyes. "My mother said almost the same thing," she admitted, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. "There's a pact. If the trial stays professional and one side wins legitimately, the loser merges under favorable terms. But if any personal scandal leaks, especially anything involving us, investors seize everything. Both families lose control." The words landed like stones in still water. Their secret lesbian relationship, the one thing that had kept them sane through years of pressure, was now the single greatest threat to billions in assets and generations of legacy. Sophie reached across the table under the cover of a newspaper, squeezing Leslie's fingers. "Then we stay invisible. We fight like hell in court and love like hell in private. We can balance it." Leslie's smile was sad. "Can we? Because every time I see you destroy my witnesses, I wonder if part of you enjoys it." Monday's session escalated the tension. Sophie introduced a new exhibit, a series of timestamps that contradicted Leslie's key defense witness. The cross-examination was brutal yet professional, and the judge sustained her objections. Leslie's face remained neutral, but Sophie caught the flash of betrayal in her eyes during the lunch break. They met briefly in the parking garage. "That was cold," Leslie said quietly. "You used details I told you in confidence last month." Sophie defended herself sharply. "It was public record, Les. Don't make this personal." The argument ended with Leslie walking away first, leaving Sophie staring at the concrete floor. That night the apartment felt colder than usual. They made up with quiet apologies and longer embraces, but the seed of distrust had been planted. As the trial entered its second week, Sophie noticed subtle changes in Leslie's strategy. She was holding back certain arguments, almost as if protecting Sophie from a counterpunch. Sophie confronted her during a late-night call. "You're pulling punches." "Why?" Leslie's voice cracked. "Because I love you more than I hate losing. But my family is pressuring me. They suspect something." The revelation forced Sophie to face her own ambition. Winning meant everything to her father, to the Harrington name. Losing meant watching Leslie's family absorb hers. The pact made the stakes existential. Sophie began researching old Harrington Voss contracts in secret, piecing together the full picture. What she found chilled her. The agreement was ironclad, signed the year she and Leslie were born. A gentleman's deal to ensure their companies dominated the AI space together. The daughters' relationship had never been anticipated. Now it was the wild card. Midweek brought a breakthrough for Sophie. She uncovered an internal Voss memo that Leslie had tried to suppress. Presenting it in court shifted momentum dramatically. The gallery buzzed. Leslie's objection was overruled. Afterward, in the restroom, Leslie cornered her. "You swore you wouldn't use that." Sophie's response was clinical. "I swore to win for my family. This is bigger than us. The words hung between them like a verdict. That evening Leslie canceled their usual meeting, sending only a short text. Need space to think. Sophie sat alone in her loft, staring at the city skyline. Ambition and love warring inside her chest. She had always believed she could have both. For the first time she wasn't sure. The following days blurred into strategy sessions and sleepless nights. Sophie's father praised her progress at a family dinner, dangling the CEO title like a prize. Leslie's mother did the same on her side, reminding her daughter of the legacy at stake. The pact loomed larger with every ruling. Sophie started noticing private investigators tailing her after court, a clear sign the families were growing suspicious. She warned Leslie, and for the first time they argued openly about ending things to protect everyone. Is love worth losing everything? Leslie asked, tears in her eyes. Sophie had no answer. The trial continued its relentless pace, each side landing blows, but the real war was happening in the shadows of their hearts. Sophie realized with cold clarity that the next major ruling could force the first irreversible choice. The discovery came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Sophie had stayed late at the firm, poring over sealed exhibits, when a plain manila envelope arrived by courier marked personal. Inside were photocopies of the original pact, signed by both fathers in 1993, a detailed merger blueprint disguised as litigation. The clause that stopped her cold was on page 7. Any romantic or personal entanglement between direct heirs that becomes public shall trigger automatic forfeiture of all claims, with control passing to neutral trustees. The language was clinical, but the intent was merciless. Their love, if exposed, would bankrupt both families overnight. Sophie drove straight to Leslie's apartment, envelope in hand. Leslie read the documents in silence, face paling. They knew this could happen. They built in the kill switch. They sat on the floor surrounded by papers, the rain drumming against the windows like accusations. For the first time, the weight of their secret felt crushing. Sophie traced the signatures with a finger. We were babies when they signed this. They never imagined us. Leslie laughed bitterly. Or maybe they did and hoped we'd be smarter. The conversation stretched into the night. They weighed options. Come clean and lose everything, or continue the charade and risk exposure every single day. Sophie felt her ambition harden. We fight the case harder. We win clean. Then we merge and disappear together. Leslie looked at her with something close to fear. You're starting to sound like them. Friday's court session was electric. Sophie used the new understanding to anticipate Leslie's moves, blocking a key motion with surgical precision. The judge ruled in her favor. Leslie's team looked rattled. During recess, Leslie pulled Sophie into an empty stairwell. You're using the pact against me now? The accusation stung because it was half true. Sophie defended herself. I'm protecting us both. If I win legitimately, the pact protects the merger. Leslie stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. But at what cost to us? Their kiss in that stairwell was fierce, almost angry, a collision of love and resentment. When they parted, Leslie's eyes were wet. I don't know how much longer I can do this. The weekend brought forced separation. Sophie's father demanded a full briefing at the estate. He praised her progress but warned that any hint of softness toward the Voss side would be seen as weakness. Leslie's mother did the same, pressuring her daughter to dig deeper into Harrington's vulnerabilities. Both women felt the families closing in. Sophie spent Sunday alone, replaying every moment with Leslie, questioning whether ambition had begun to eclipse love. She called Leslie late that night. The conversation was tense but honest. Maybe we need to cool things until the verdict, Sophie suggested. Leslie's silence lasted too long. Maybe you're right. The words carved a hollow space in Sophie's chest. Monday resumed with new intensity. Leslie came out swinging, introducing evidence Sophie hadn't anticipated. The courtroom momentum shifted. Sophie countered effectively, but the effort left her drained. After court, she found Leslie waiting by her car in the underground garage. I found something in the old files, Leslie said, handing over a flash drive. My mother's private notes on the pact. Gets worse. They planned for this exact scenario. They read the notes together in Sophie's car, windows fogged. The pact included a contingency. If the daughter's relationship threatened the deal, The families would disown them publicly to save the companies. The revelation was a gut punch. Sophie gripped the steering wheel. They would throw us away. Leslie nodded slowly. So we have to choose before they force us to. The choice hung over them like the verdict itself. Sophie felt her world splitting. Part of her wanted to burn the pact and run away with Leslie. The other part, the lawyer forged by years of expectation, saw victory as the only path to freedom. Leslie sensed the shift. "You're pulling away already," she said softly. Sophie denied it, but the lie tasted bitter. That night they held each other without words, the silence louder than any argument. The trial was entering its critical phase, and with it came the first real fracture in their bond. Sophie realized with chilling logic that survival might demand sacrifice, and the thought terrified her more than losing the case. The fracture widened over the next 10 days. Sophie threw herself into preparation for the final witnesses, working 18-hour days that left no room for stolen moments with Leslie. Texts became brief and professional. When they did meet, the conversations circled the pact like sharks. Leslie pushed for a joint plan to expose the family's manipulation after the trial. Sophie resisted. "Exposing it now risks everything. We win first, then negotiate from strength." Leslie's frustration grew. "Strength for who? You're starting to see me as the enemy." The accusation lingered long after Leslie left. Court resumed with closing arguments approaching. Sophie delivered a masterclass in summation prep, anticipating every Leslie move. During a heated sidebar, their eyes locked longer than necessary. The judge cleared his throat, unaware of the undercurrent. After the session, Leslie cornered Sophie in the hallway. "You're using things I told you in bed. Personal things." Sophie's response was cold. "Everything is evidence now." The words were out before she could stop them. Leslie stepped back as if slapped. "Then maybe we were never on the same side." She walked away without looking back. Sophie stood frozen, the echo of her own ambition ringing in her ears. That night Sophie drank alone in her loft, replaying the moment. The pact had become a mirror, showing her exactly who she was becoming. She drove to Leslie's building at 2 in the morning and buzzed the intercom. Leslie let her up without a word. They stood in the doorway inches apart. "I don't know how to choose," Sophie admitted. Leslie pulled her inside and kissed her with desperate intensity. For a few hours the world outside disappeared again. But when morning came, the distance returned. Leslie dressed in silence. "The families are watching closer now. Private investigators on both sides. One more mistake and it's over." Sophie nodded, already calculating the risk. The love was still there, but survival instincts were taking over. The final week of testimony brought the climax closer. Sophie introduced the decisive exhibit, a financial trail Leslie had missed. The courtroom gasped. Leslie's objection was overruled. Momentum swung decisively to Harrington. That evening Leslie sent a single text. "Congratulations on your win today. I hope it was worth it." Sophie stared at the screen for an hour before replying with a simple, "I'm sorry." The reply never came. Instead, the next morning Leslie's cross-examination was merciless, exposing a flaw in Sophie's star witness. The score evened again. The families watched from the gallery, faces unreadable. Sophie felt the pact tightening around her throat like a noose. Over the weekend both women received ultimatums. Sophie's father made it clear. Win the case cleanly and the CEO position was hers. Lose and she would be cut off. Leslie's mother delivered the same message with colder precision. The pact was no longer abstract. It was a loaded gun pointed at their future. Sophie met Leslie one last time in a borrowed safe house upstate. They talked through the night, weighing every scenario. "If we choose love, we lose everything material," Sophie said. Leslie replied quietly, "If we choose victory, we lose each other." No resolution came. They parted at dawn with a single kiss that felt like goodbye. The trial's final days loomed, and with them the moment when one of them would have to pull the trigger. The final arguments began on a gray Tuesday. Sophie stood before the jury, her voice steady as she summarized 2 weeks of evidence. Leslie followed with equal fire, painting Harrington as the aggressor. The jury deliberated for 3 days. During the wait, Sophie received a late-night visit from her father. The investigators found something. A photo. You and Leslie leaving her building last month. The image was grainy but clear. Victor slid it across the desk. End it now or I will. Sophie felt the world tilt. She called Leslie immediately. They know. Or they suspect enough to act. Leslie's voice was calm, too calm. Then we make the choice they want. The jury returned Thursday afternoon. The verdict. Harrington Innovations prevailed on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Sophie accepted congratulations with a numb smile while Leslie sat motionless at the defense table. Later, in the empty corridor, Leslie approached. You used the personal details I shared about my mother's health to impeach our witness. You won. There was no anger, only resignation. Sophie reached for her hand, but Leslie pulled away. The pact is satisfied. The merger goes through. But we don't. Sophie tried to explain, to justify the cold logic that had guided her final moves. Leslie listened in silence, then spoke the words that ended everything. I loved the woman who fought beside me, not the one who sacrificed me to win. The merger announcement came 2 weeks later. Both families celebrated publicly while Sophie moved through the motions like a ghost. Leslie resigned from the Voss firm and disappeared from New York circles. Sophie received the CEO title she had craved, but every boardroom victory tasted like the kiss they had shared in the stairwell. Nights were the worst. She would wake reaching for a body that was no longer there. The pact had delivered survival, but at the cost of the only thing that had ever felt like home. Sophie visited the courthouse one last time, standing in the empty room where it all began. The gavel was silent now, but the echo of their final conversation rang louder than ever. Months passed. The merged company thrived under Sophie's leadership, stock prices climbing steadily. She attended galas and gave interviews about female leadership in tech, all while the hollow space inside her grew. Leslie's name never came up in public again. Sophie heard through mutual contacts that she had opened a small practice in Seattle, far from the spotlight. The pact had worked exactly as designed. Families intact, empires stronger, secrets buried. Yet Sophie found herself rereading old messages late at night, the ones that still carried Leslie's warmth. Ambition had delivered everything she was raised to want. Love had demanded the one price she could never afford. One rainy evening in October, Sophie stood on the same rooftop bar where they had once hidden from the world. The city lights blurred through the glass. She pulled out her phone and typed a message she would never send. I chose victory. I lost you. Was it worth it? The cursor blinked, waiting. She deleted it instead. The pact had forced the choice, but she had made it with open eyes. Survival in their world required cold calculation. Love had been the variable they could never control. Sophie finished her drink and walked back into the night, the successful CEO of a billion-dollar empire, alone with the consequences she had chosen. True or false? In the end, choosing victory over love was the only logical decision for survival in their world of power and secrets.